Hey guys, welcome to another video. So today we're actually transitioning into loops. Specifically today we're going to learn about the for loops in C, and this is a very important topic, and you will see in pretty much every higher level, especially in school, higher level programming uh, homework or project or anything like that, you're definitely going to see for loops. So before we begin, please make sure to go over video 7. Uh, in this one, we go over the increment and decrement operators, and it's going to be very critical into knowing how to navigate the for loop and to do the correct syntax, and especially the compound assignment. This is something we definitely see in for loops. So the syntax of a compound assignment is sum plus equals n, or sum uh, minus equals n. So what it pretty much shows is the sum plus equals n is just sum equals the old value of sum plus n, and this is the new value of sum. So let's say sum is 7, right? Let's say s equals 7 and n equals 2. So if you're doing s minus equals n, so the new value of s will be 5. Why? Because it's going to be the old value of s minus n, and that equals 5. And that new value is going to be stored in n. So this is great for loops because it's going to keep happening to as much as you want. It's going to keep happening. It's either going to go down, it's going to go up. It just depends how much really that you want to do it in this in your program. So another very important is logical expressions. You have to know the relational operators, the greater than, equal to, greater than, equal to, those expressions, and not necessarily very important for loops, but just to know them, the equality operators. And we'll go to the next slide. Important options. Okay, so loops. We haven't learned how to make the program run continuously yet. So up to this point, our program can only run once. So for example, if you enter here, I actually have a program ready. Uh, so for example, here. So we're asking to input a number, right? We're asking the user to input a number, and our program is going to find out if it's an even or an odd number. Easy, correct? So we're going to run our program. We're going to enter 2. It's going to say it's an even number, but then completely gets out of the program. So it only runs once. It doesn't matter what number you put in it. Let's say it's 3. Done. It only runs once. So that's why we learn loops. We learn loops so we can find a way to keep making our program run and not only be once. And this can be very useful, especially when you're trying to find the sum of a number or program or anything like that, or just keep running the program until you want it to end. Like, something very important that could be used for that is filling a database. You want to keep adding names or ID numbers or student names, until you want to finish the database. But if your program only runs once and only enters one name, that's not a great database. All right. So there's 3 different types of loop: the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. Um, so the for loop is going to be the most common that we use. The while loop is just a similar version of for loop. Syntax is different, and um, these two are for more like niche type of situations. The for loop is definitely the most one that we will use. Okay, so the syntax. The syntax of a for loop is we have the initialization, semicolon, the condition, semicolon, and the increment and decrement. It just depends on how you want to change it. It can even have a compound assignment in here if you want. And these are um, are put in by parentheses with the 4 on the outside, right? And then we have our brackets. And then we're going to have our pretty much our code of what we want to keep running. Do not put statements or numbers in this bracket that you don't want to keep running. For example, if you printf my name is Andrew, it's going to keep running every single time, and you don't want to keep saying your name. Maybe you're going to keep asking the user to input a value. Okay, so what's your second number? What's your third number? What's your fourth number? That is something that you want to have in the for loop. That is not something that you want to have. Something like you saying your name over and over and over is not something you want to have in here. So I'll show you guys what I mean, but first let's get through the syntax. Let me explain it. So the first step is initialization. So the initialization step, the variable needs to be declared beforehand, and in the initialization step, we're going to show exactly how we're going to initialize the variable. So here are two examples. Here are just two examples so you can see. So the first one is we're going to declare I outside of the for loop. This could be anywhere in your program before the for loop. So I'm going to declare I, correct? And now we're going to have, where's my pen? There's my pen. We're going to initialize I to be some number. It can be any number that helps you in your for loop. Don't just put any random number. It has to satisfy the condition that we'll talk about in the next slide. So, if you want to start with I equals 0, start with I equals 0. Or about this side, if you want to start with j equals 1, and we're initializing j for this statement. And then we have our body of statements right here. And then we have our body of statements right here. Okay, so this initialization step only happens once. We're only initializing, it's a little bit hard to see my pen. We're only initializing this once, right? Because I is not going to keep being 0, j is not going to keep being 1. So variables such as ijk are mostly seen because they're very easy to write, read, have it many times. But you can have any variable names. So for the condition step is the second and probably the most important of the three. Well, they're all very important, but I say this is probably the most, the place where you can really mess up your for loop. So this step determines if the loop continues or terminates. So what I mean is, we're going to initialize I, right? We're going to have n equals 3. We're adding another variable, n equals 3. And then we're going to initialize I to be 0. And this step right here, this determines if the for loop is going to execute its statements or not. So in this first run, it's going to be 0 for I and 3. So this is I and this is n. So is this statement true? It is true, so it's going to execute these statements, right? It's going to execute. Now, we're going to go to the next one, which is going to be the increment. So this is going to go up 1, and we'll see this in a second, and this is true. So it's going to run again the statements. Then it's going to be 2. And that's going to be 3. This is going to be true. So it's going to run again. And now when it gets to 3, 3 is not less than 3. So this is going to be false. And it exits the for loop. This exits completely. And now you just continue with your code down over here. So, if the condition is determined to be false, the loop terminates. If the condition is determined to be true, the loop continues and executes the statement. That's why it's called, that's why it's a loop. It keeps continuing until it's false. That's why this is called a condition. It's conditional on if it's true. And this is the last step. It's called the counter step. This is the increment or decrement or the compound assignment if you want. So after the statements are executed, the compiler changes the counter variable's value. So the coder decides, which you decide whether you want to increase or decrease the value. So like I was doing before, where's my, there it is. So like I was doing before, I, n. So let's say we start off with 1. We want 1 over here. We don't want 0. So it's going to be 1, n, which is 3. So this is true. Now, this is true. Now the compiler goes and execute these statements and comes back over here and it adds 1 to I. So I plus plus is pretty much I plus equals 1. So if I is 1 right now, it's going to add 1. So the new value of I is going to be 2. True. Because 2 is less than 3. And now it's going to go, remember, this only happens once right here. It's going to do the same thing. Oh, and this should be I right here. This is going to happen again. So it's going to evaluate this this conditional statement. This conditional statement right here. Let's clear the screen. So it's going to evaluate this statement right here. So it's 2, 3. It's going to see that it's true. Going to execute these statements. Come back up here and add 1 to I. So it's 2 plus 1. Now at this point, this is false. So it's going to come over here again and figure out, this should be I. It's going to figure out 3 is less than 3. It's going to be false. So it's just going to completely skip out of the statement. So here's an example. There it is. So we're going to declare I. We're going to say that I equals 1. I equals 1. And we're going to say that our condition, it has to be less than 3. So let's start I equals 1, less than 3. So for the first run, it's going to be true. And it's going to print out %d. Let's do it this one. Alright, so it's going to say 1 over 3. And this is true. So it's going to execute this statement right here. So it's going to print out %d and new line. So it's going to be the value of I. So the value of I is 1. For the second one, it's now going to increment the value since it finished the statement. It's going to increment the value. It's now going to be 2, 3, and this is also true. So now it's going to execute the statement of printing. It's going to be 2. And now it's going to come back up to increment the value. And now it's going to be 3. 3. This is going to be false. And this is what the compiler prints out. 1, 2. So here's another example. So we're going to, there it is. We're going to declare I. I is going to be equals 10 this time. So our condition is that I has to be larger than 0. And our we're going to do a decrement operator instead of an increment operator, so we're going to be subtracting. So we're going to start at 10, and it has to be larger than 0. So this is true. And now it's going to print out t minus %d, which is I, so it's going to be t minus 10 and counting. It's going to come back up here, subtract 1 from 10. It's going to be 9, 0. It's going to print out t minus 9 and counting. Same thing, t minus 8 and counting, and you get the idea. So it's going to look something like this. So here's the code, right here, and this is the output. It's going to be t minus 10 and counting for the first one. Subtract 1, then it's going to be t minus 9 and counting, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So this is what it pretty much looks like. There's a start. It starts. Let's clear this out. So the code starts. The for loop starts. It's going to initialize. Initialization is the first step. Initialization is the first step. This step right here. As you notice, we never come back to it in this flowchart after this. If it's true, it goes this way, right? If it's false, it goes this. It never goes back to initialization step. So we're going to evaluate the condition, right? So right here, our first condition is 10 larger than 0, because I is 10 right here, and larger than 0. So we're going to see, is this true or false? This is true. So we're going to execute the code inside the loop, which is this. We're going to print out t minus %d, which is I. The reason we use %d is because I is going to be changing. That number is not going to stay a single number, and that's why it's important to have the right number that you want as I. Or you can have a different number inside, but it has to be declared inside the for loop. And now, after the code inside the loop is run, after this is run, now we're going to update the value of I by subtracting 1. And once the condition is false, when it's 0 and 0, once it's false, it stops. So here's just a couple examples of incrementing from 0 to n minus 1, 1 to n minus 1 to 0. Fairly simple idioms. So for the for loop, I equals 0. So I equals 0. I is smaller than n. I plus plus. And why does this say n minus 1? Because it's never going to reach n. So once, let's say I equals 0, let's say n equals 10. So when I is 9 and n is 10, right? This is still true. So it's going to run until it's still true. But once I is 10 and n is 10, it's going to be false and not do the loop exactly, right? So let's say n is 10, n minus 1 is 9, which is this value right here. But that's when I equals 0. When I equals 1 and there's a less than or equal to, it's going to be equal to n now. Because I can take the same value as n because of this equal to sign. And same thing from decrementing. It's the same exact thing. And what's important is we can use the break statement in these for loops. They're very important if we want to break out of the statement. Once we reach a number, we can have this for loop keep running keep running and running and running and running. And once it reaches a value, it can now break out of the statement. So if n is in this for loop, if n is even, it can break out of the statement. All right. If it's odd, it won't break out of the statement. It just print out that n is odd. So we'll do a couple of examples. So this is an example from a different program that we did. It was either the last video or 2 videos ago. So it's pretty much stating to input a number. You can input any number that you want, and your program needs to. Oh, we already did this one. That I already showed you at the beginning of the video, but pretty much it's saying input a number, and the program is going to just spit out if it's an even or an odd number. But the problem that we have, it only runs once. How can we make this run more than once? So, the important thing is you need to do a for loop. You need to declare I, which I usually use as my initialization variable, and declare n, which I usually use as my conditional variable. So I'll write the syntax for the for loop over here. For I equals some number, semicolon I, and I plus plus. So this is pretty much what I'm going to use. So I'm going to declare I, and I'm going to declare n. So I want to ask the user how many times they want this loop to run. So printf. It's a very simple thing you can do. Just ask the user how many times they want the loop to run. How many want the loop to run? And we're going to store this. We're going to store this into n. Oop. Oh, apologize about that. So we're going to write the for loop. I want to include this input number because I want to keep asking the user a different number for them to input. So if I didn't, it just keep printing out 2, 2, 2 if I put 2, you know? So this allows them to input a different number every single time. So I'm going to start off at 0. I'm going to start off at n and I++. Use the brackets. Include the code that I want to run, which is pretty much everything that I want to run. So why did I write it like this? Why did I write it like this? So I'm initializing I to be 0 and I less than n. So what's going to happen is that the first time it runs, it's going to be 0, and n is how much I want the loop to run. So let's say they put in 3. So it's going to be 0. It's going to be 0, 3. Then it's going to be 0, 1. Oops, sorry. It's going to be 1, 3. Then it's going to be 2, 3. So I just wanted to see you guys visualize what's happening in this loop. So the first run, it's going to be 0, right? It's true. It's going to execute these statements, and now it's going to add 1 to I. Now it's at this step. This is true. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to execute this body of statements, add 1 to I, and now it's going to be here. It's going to do the same thing 3 times, but once it's here, it does not do anything. It terminates. So how many times did the loop run? 1, 2, and 3. So it ran 3 times. That's why I store how many times I want the loop to run in n. And this is adding 1 every single time. So my loop will run 3 different times. And so what's actually happening inside the loop? I'm asking the user to input a number. It's being stored in A, and A's finding whether it's an even number or an odd number. So let's run this, see if everything's correct. Let's take this out of here. Alright, so how many times do I want the loop to run? Let's say 3 times. Input a number, even, odd, odd. So it ran 3 times. I asked the loop to run 3 times. It asked me to input a number. I put 2. It spits out 2 is an even number. It prompts me to put another input number. It's going to be 1. 1 is odd, and another input number is 3. So let's see if I say 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you go. It just keeps running to how many times I want it to run. So I can say 100 times, and it will run 100 times. So this one was a little bit, a little bit on the harder side, just because we already had a program that was already on there. So let's go with a more basic type of question. So it's asking us to write a C program to find the sum of the first 10 natural numbers. So we're going to prompt the user, or just even not even the user. There's going to be no input in here. We're going to prompt the program to display the first 10 natural numbers and find the sum of it. So you're not inputting any numbers. There's going to be no scanf functions in here. It's going to be pretty much all coded from the program. So you're going to do a printf function to the first 10 natural numbers are, and you're going to have some way of it to print this out and find the sum. You are not going to hard code this number. Your program has to figure out the sum using a for loop, and make sure you are using compound assignments to figure out the sum of the variable. So guys, just take a second so you can get started on this program. Okay, so I'm just going to get started on this. So it's going to be the studio.h int main. So we're doing I for we're doing I for the initialization step, and we can do we don't have to do n. Actually, we can just hard code 10 into there. So what are we doing? We're going to printf the first 10 natural numbers are. We're not going to put that in the for loop. And by the way, we definitely want to include a new line character here. We are not going to include that into the for loop because we do not want our program to keep running or printing out the first natural 10 numbers are. Because if you put it in the for loop, it's going to run that 10 times, and we do not want that. So this is where our for loop comes into play. So we're going to do for I equals 1, and then we're going to do I equals less than or equal to 10, I plus plus. Now we're going to printf %d. We're going to have a space in here so it can be printing all next to each other. And now we're going to use I. And I forgot over here that I do want to initialize sum over here. So we're going to use compound assignment, just like I said, to find out the value of the sum at the end. And printf the sum is %d sum. Return 0. there it is, the printf. Let's run that one more time. Alright. We'll move on to new line character here. Alright, so here's the program. The first 10 natural numbers are, new line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're going to have a new line before this one, and the sum is 55. So let's go through why I did that. So what's happening here? I'm declaring I for our initialization step. I'm declaring sum for this number right here. And I'm going to print out the first 10 natural numbers are. We're going to have a new line character, so we can have this enter key here and have this on its own line right here. And what's happening here? So, initialization step, I equals 1, less than or greater 2 equals 10. It's true. It's going to print, it's going to execute the body of statements. So it's going to print out 1 and space. No new line character is here. So it's not going to the next line. It's just going to be a space. And right here, we are not printing a sum, so you don't see it in the actual program, but it's happening. So sum equals sum plus I. So what's happening is that it's the new value of sum equals the old value of sum plus I. So what is this? This is sum equals 0 plus 1. And in the next one, it's going to be sum equals 1 plus 2. So what's happening is that this value of sum for the first time is 0. So this is going to be 0 plus I, which is I equals 1. And now I is going to be added 1, and it's going to execute again when this condition is true. So it's just going to keep happening. The new value of sum is the old value of sum plus I. I is changing and sum is changing. So you keep adding the value of I. So that's how you use the compound operator to find the sum. It's very important. And that's how you pretty much do it. So there you go, guys. It's an intro into the for loop. Next video, we're only going to do questions about the for loop. Make sure to study up. Make sure to look at all your resources to make sure you understand the for loop. I'm gonna start a little bit easier with for loop questions in the next video, and then by the end we're gonna do some pretty difficult one, and it's probably gonna be a longer video on the longer side. Well, thank you so much. Please subscribe, like, leave a comment, and this is Everything Program. Thank you so much, guys.